Greetings, family. Sister Shanice in the house. We are live and direct to you, our wonderful audience. I hope each and every one of you have risen in power today, risen in strength, risen to accomplish much. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to bring you another show today. We are on episode 6 in our series, African History Hidden in Plain Sight. And we have been looking into Ireland. Yeah, we've been looking at the ethnic cleansing of Ireland. And in today's episode, we're going to be looking at the life that the people in Ireland actually had. You know, their thriving estates, their bustling towns. We're going to look at how prosperous that city, that nation, Ireland, actually was in the 17th century prior to the Cromwellian wars. And I think it's really important that we start there because, you know, after the wars and once they'd been conquered and their land had been confiscated and there was all that forced transportation that we were looking at in previous chapters. As we know, life went downhill for the Irish people, but we don't want to start there today. I decided that we're going to go back before we go forward. So I'm just going to give you a little while to come through the door, and thanking you so much in advance for joining me. I can see we've got Sister Denise in the house. She is the first one to be joining us today. Good afternoon, Sister Denise, joining us all the way from Chicago in the USA, the United States of America. How is life treating you over there, beloved? I hope all is well. Drop us a note in the chat and let us know. So as she comes through the door, just as Sister Denise has done, let me know that you're in the house so that I can drop you on screen. I'm using a different software today, so hopefully you're hearing me loud and clear and you're seeing me okay as well. We've got our beloved Sister Karen in the house as well. Rise up, Sister Karen. Great to have you in the house. Good to know that you are here. Thank you so much as well for all of your support, your love, your energy, your emails. Enough love and respect to you, beloved sis. And to everyone who's watching, who's not actually logged into their YouTube at the moment, thank you so much. But if you do log into YouTube, you'll be able to drop me messages and I'll be able to post your messages on the chat. And Sister Karen is welcoming all the kings and queens in the house. B1, black first, beautiful first, brilliant first. We are indeed a brilliant people. And I tell you, the more I look into our former greatness, the more I realize how advanced we were as a people and how great we therefore actually really are. You know, we invented, we had advanced civilizations, we had advanced societies. Even today, you know, with all of the sophisticated technologies that they've got, they can't work out how we did some of the things that we did back then. And, you know, there's even what we know about the advanced civilizations of yesteryear is just so enormous. You know, it's phenomenal what our ancestors were able to do. The scientific knowledge that they had, the knowledge they had of engineering, of the environment, of the minerals. We were moving huge boulders, 100-ton boulders, and somehow putting them into precise place, you know, with precision, you know, without the technologies that we've got today. They don't know how we did that and built the pyramids, built Stonehenge, and built so many of those monuments from India all the way across here in Europe. It's just phenomenal what we were able to do. And what that just tells us is that that knowledge is still with us. It's buried in our DNA. And the moment we tap in, you know, to our DNA and we're able to somehow connect with our ancestors and the universe and the outerverse to bring back that knowledge, you know, to bring back that advanced technological, engineering, scientific, cosmological knowledge that we had, it's going to be a different playing field, family. And, I don't think I'll be around to see that day, but, who knows? Maybe I'll be reincarnated and come back. Obviously, I won't come back with the memory of Sister Shanice, but, I might come back to actually experience the day, when we rise again as a people. So I'm sure you're all looking forward to that day as well, because what we do know is then when we rise and when we take back control of this planet, which is what we are supposed to be doing today. I mean, once we do that, the planet is going to be a better place. The environment, we're the ones to save the environment. We're the ones to save the marine life. We're the ones to save the various species, the animal kingdom, the insect world, the whole, even humanity, itself is waiting on us, the rightful indigenous people of this planet, to take back our place, to save the planet. That's our job, to take care of this planet. And we have to rise up and take back control from those who are destroying the planet and depleting it, of its resources and everything, and who are destroying humanity as well. We've got a job to do. I want to welcome the Hebrew Israelite in the house. We've got the Hebrew Shemite in the house. He's saying, great job, Jude Bellingham, Liama, and the other brothers of football. Okay, talking football there. Okay, so you're picking up some of the footballers. You'll have to tell me a bit more. Oh, Bellingham. Oh, yes, Jude Bellingham. He actually scored a goal. I did see that game. Yeah, that was in the semi-finals. Yes, against, who did we play? Was it France? Yeah, I think it was France. Anyway, yeah, well done. And to the other young man, was it Shaka, who scored the other two goals? Big up, big up, big up yourself as well. Anyway, I love to see when our people do well. And yes, beloved Kev, she says, this is my Wednesday place. I love hearing about the Black history that they are trying to continue to hide from us. Yes, indeed. Oh, they are so trying to hide our history. So we also want to big up our beloved Dr. Clyde Winters as well. He won't be joining me this evening. He's still recovering from his operation, but we are sending, a huge amount of healing vibrations his way. We did that before, didn't we? We sent the healing vibrations to Dr. Clyde Winters, and it really helped to elevate him and lift up his spirits. And so we thank you, each and every one of you, for those who are sending the healing vibrations to our beloved Dr. Clyde Winters down the technological, invisible microwaves, the waves, the telepathic waves that we can use to communicate along, that we used to use back in the days. Thank you for those of you who are doing so. So rise up, Sister Kev. She's reminding everyone to please share this platform. Thank you so much. And if you're not a subscriber, please do subscribe. I'm really rearing to go today. Hopefully those of you who are in the room are as ready as I am. Those of you who join late, you can always rewind later. But we're going to be going into chapter 6 of our book today. And the book that I'm reading from is To Hell or Barbados, the ethnic cleansing of Ireland. But before I go into that part of the show, what I want to do, as I said, is take a little peek at Ireland prior to the transplantation and the ethnic cleansing, because what a society it was. It was thriving. There was so much innovation. So we're going to go into that via a little bit of a presentation before we go into today's show. Okay. So I'm just going to get ready behind the scenes as you come through the door. Thank you, Sister Kev, for sending healing vibrations to our researcher, the researcher of all researchers, Dr. Clyde Winters. Yeah, and my Patreon name is Sister Shanice. Should you want to support me on Patreon, I must admit I'm not as active on Patreon as I ought to be, but if you want to support my work, so you can do so by joining me on Patreon, and you can also support my works by buying one of my books as well. So thank you so much in advance for your support. Much appreciate love. Okay, so I'm just going to get the presentation up in the background that I want to start with today. I want to big up my daughter Sasha as well for helping me to, look a bit better online. I mean, I'm looking now, and I think I'm in time, and hopefully you're hearing me and seeing me okay. So big up my beautiful one and only. Thank you so much for that. And to those of you who already got my book, I thank you so much appreciate love the support every time. Thank you, family. Okay, so yeah, let me just get ready to share the screen now and see how we do. I'm going to be looking here on YouTube. See how I'm coming out. So yeah, today's session, we are continuing to talk about the ethnic cleansing of Ireland that happened during the 17th century. It's a part of our history that most of us didn't learn about in school, college, or university. And, most of us are unaware of the extent to which there was a thriving, very successful, thriving Black population and community in Ireland prior to the ethnic cleansing that happened during the 17th century. Some of you may be familiar with terms like the Blackamoors. They were estate owners in Ireland. They had their own crests, their own emblems. They held positions in royalty, in parliamentary positions. They were the higher echelons of society. And of course, there were, thriving Black communities with professionals of a whole range of skills set in Ireland at that time. And if you go to my my book, Hidden in the Shadows of Ancient Britain, an erased African history restored, you will find out there, about the migration of us as Africans and the original Africans that settled in Britain, the names that we were known by, our lifestyle here. And, there's so much research that I've done that's gone into that book that it's well worth your while getting it, family. So this is episode 6 in the series, African History Hidden in Plain Sight, from Prosperity to Plantation. Okay. And as I said, we're going to be jumping in to look at life in Ireland before the wars, before, the transportations, because Ireland was a thriving Black community. And I want us to, know that side of Ireland. And I can see I've still got Karen's message up there, but it's fine. Throughout the entire show, we want to be sending healing vibrations indeed to our beloved researcher, Dr. Clyde Winters. Yeah, so from prosperity to plantation, most of us are very familiar with the numerous, well over 100 thriving Black communities, towns and cities in America, because our American brothers and sisters have done phenomenally well, actually making us aware of those Black towns and cities. But we need to do more in Britain to research our thriving Black cities and towns here in Britain. And in Ireland, we had many thriving towns and cities. We had Black communities that had their thriving estates. We had bustling towns. We were doing the farming. We had close-knit communities, and this is knowledge and land and skills that we had inherited for generations, for thousands of years, because we had settled in that region, and we were the original people of Britain and had been settled in Britain for thousands and thousands of years prior to the Great Conquest, prior to the confiscation of the land, prior to the forced transportations and the unimaginable suffering that our people went through. So in this session where we're looking into African history hidden in plain sight, we're going to be following the journey, starting with, the peaceful life that our family had in that region before, a lot of them ended up being transplanted to places like Barbados, Jamaica, Virginia, in America, etc. Okay, so thank you for joining me on the Sister Shanice Show today, coming to you live and direct. It is Wednesday, the 22nd of July. And if you don't already have my paper, The Omission of an Asian African Irish Population from Contemporary Western Education, then do get yourself a copy. It's available at academia.edu. In that paper, it's a research paper that I wrote. And my main objective for writing that paper really was to investigate the ethnic identity of the original people of Ireland and whether the original people of Ireland were actually dark-skinned or pale-skinned Caucasians. And after my rigorous research, family, and I bring you the evidence of my research in that paper, so get that paper. I examined archaeological evidence, anthropological evidence, linguistic and documented evidence, and it actually revealed that Britain had a hidden history that belonged to us as Africans. And it was as a result of doing Dr. Clyde Winters' course and doing the research, following his methodology on that course, that I wrote that paper. And after I found all of this evidence of our African presence in Britain, including England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, it set me off on a journey to start doing more research and to exploring more, of the evidence that's out there of our existence in Britain. And when you get that paper, you will realize that we have been in Britain for tens of thousands of years, at least tens of thousands of years. Okay. And so you can imagine, a population of people residing in a space for tens of thousands of years and the advancement that must have happened through the centuries, over those centuries. And remember, Britain wasn't isolated back in the days. We were very much part of a greater civilization that came from out of Africa itself. We, the people who had come from Africa to Britain over 40,000 years ago or so, were still very much connected to our family on the continent of Africa through trade, through migration, through technologies. Basically it was like a bridge between Africa and Britain. And we use the sea primarily as our trade route and as our highways and byways. And so, we were thriving as a people until those who didn't look like us came amongst us. Initially, peacefully, because they needed civilizing, really. They came into our communities from out of the Caucasus Mountains. They settled among us. Our people fixed them up. Our men, it seems, had a fascination and then what became an obsession with their women. And, we basically started going downhill after that. But that's a whole nother story. Let me leave that story for there and focus on today's show, which is about the ethnic cleansing of islands. But I have well over 500 videos on this channel and so many chapters of our history. I've covered so many chapters of our history. I mean, even the series before this one, I did 20 episodes that looked into our former greatness on every continent on this planet. So go check out some of those previous videos and those earlier episodes, because I've uncovered so much of our forgotten history. Okay. And going to continue to do that. And thanks in advance to those of you who take the time to read my book, watch my videos, and very importantly, thank you to those of you who share my videos as well. Much appreciate your support. I also want to remind you that there have been so many, even white scholars out there, who have looked into the earlier days of the inhabitants, of who the inhabitants were of Britain. And they've actually found that their early inhabitants were indeed dark-skinned people. So we've got Beddoe here. He was famous back in 1885 for his works on the races of Britain. And he's documented, done a lot of documentation as well that tracks the prevalence of dark hair and dark eyes. And let me just also tell you a bit about Waddell as well, because the reason why it's important to highlight some of these scholars is because there is this assumption made today, because of the complexion of Britain today, there's this big assumption that in ancient times, Britain, the complexion of the population of Britain must have been the same, but that certainly wasn't the case. There's a lot of talk about the Celts, which is the name that a lot of they call the Irish, and there is the assumption that the Celts are all fair-skinned, tall people, and we're right to have that image, because they portray that image in the history books, they portray that image on the television, they portray that image in their dramas, they portray the image that the Celts and the early Irish look the way they do today. But according to historians like Waddell, okay, it wasn't the case. And even right up to the 17th and 18th century, they will point to a dark population existed here in Britain. And Waddell did some work of the a lot of work, and his work you can Google and find his reports. And as I was saying a little while ago as well, you've got John Beddoe. These are just a couple that I'm mentioning. You've also got Paul Broca. He carried out one of the first scientific studies of physical characteristics, and he was living in Britain, in France at the time. And France is an area that had been long associated with the ancient Celts, and Broca, he was doing his investigations, and he was expecting to find the people of the ancient so-called Celts to look like the so-called Aryan, tall, fair-skinned, long-headed, but instead he found something very different as well. He described the descendants of those ancient Celts as being short, dark-complexioned, and round-headed. Yeah, so these are various studies, the studies of Waddell, the studies of Beddoe, the study of Paul Broca. These are just some of the 19th century researchers that have all come to the same conclusion, that the ancient population of Britain were not the pale-skinned, fair-skinned people that we see today. They were, and Waddell describes these early ancient Celts as actually being people, he said, closer to the Iberians. These are the North Africans. He said that closer to the Iberians than to the fair-haired Northern European populations. And so just because today we associate Britain with the Caucasians, they weren't the original people of this land. Similarly, we could look at Palestine, we can look at Israel, we can look at the whole of the Middle East, and we can see a population of people that's popularly promoted as being the people of that land, but they're not the indigenous people of the land. The indigenous people of the land, of course, were the Africans. And so, in the same way that I think there is the great awakening and awareness that the so-called Arabs are not the original people and indigenous people of the so-called Middle East. It is very much the case that today there is a great awakening and a realization happening that the original people of Britain were indeed us as Africans. Okay, there's scientific studies, anthropological studies, archaeological evidence, documented evidence. I've just, talked about some of the research of some of their own so-called, scholars who are all saying that the Celtic populations were predominantly dark-complexioned people here in Britain. Okay, and yes, the picture and the complexion of the population has indeed changed. And that's a result of the national cleansing that we're going to be talking about today. Okay, there is still a big cover up about the complexion of the people who were actually transported, and trying to find the records is incredibly difficult. But I have managed to find some evidence, that of the ship logs that actually confirm that the vast majority of people who were being shipped to Barbados, the Caribbean, other Caribbean islands, and America from here, Ireland and Scotland and Wales, of course, were indeed people who were described as black or brown or swarty. Okay. Yeah, very much. So if you dig deep enough, family, we can certainly find the evidence. And so we've got to ask the question, whose history do we believe? Do we believe the history that's been presented to us through the mainstream, through the media, or are we going to follow the evidence? And if we follow the evidence and it turns out that, it contradicts what is being presented to us by the mainstream, are we going to challenge it, or are we going to go along with it and keep believing it? This is up to us to make the decision about what we do. What would you do? If you were doing a research, family, and I know some of you have been doing the research out there, and I'm delighted, when I come across the research that others are doing, it's absolutely fantastic that there is more of us doing this research, but there needs to be even more of us who are questioning, the ancient people of Britain and the complexion of those people, and are uncovering that history that has been hidden. And like I said, I'm hoping that my books and my presentations will encourage more people to do that research, because we have a glorious past here in Britain. We had and created for ourselves a wonderful civilization. And today we have others who don't look like us, who are living in the estates that our ancestors built. Yes, we have others who are even wearing the clothes in the portraits that they now hang on the walls of those estates that our ancestors made, that our ancestors created. Yeah. And so, there's a lot that we need to learn about our history of our ancestors, and we also need to, very importantly, come to the realization that those ancestors of ours, many of them, tens of thousands, not 10, probably hundreds of thousands of our ancestors from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales were actually transplanted to the Caribbean. And so this history is particularly pertinent to those of us who are in the Caribbean. Many of our ancestors were also transplanted from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales to the America. So to America itself, Virginia and various other states. And so this history is particularly important to our brothers and sisters in America as well, because you have ancestral links that take you back to Ireland. Yeah. And so I'm starting today's presentation not with the suffering that our people endured, because that's what chapter 6 actually starts off with. But I'm going to, start the episode, I feel, in a more powerful and a more positive way, because I want us, first of all, to realize what we had lost. I want us to see, what Ireland actually looks like prior to the destruction. I want us to see, the prosperity of that society before it became a land that they had confiscated, before the executions, before, the forced transportations and labor. And so I hope you like that beautiful family setting with their country house in the background there. Here is an actual Jacobean. That Jacobeans are basically the Jacobites. They are the Africans who supported King James. So this is an example of the Jacobean architecture. And this goes back to the early 17th century. They're calling it, the English Renaissance style. But once we know our history, we will begin to see the properties that our ancestors left behind and the estates that they left behind prior to the confiscation. And we will recognize their estates by the architecture. And this particular architectural style that you're looking at in this image here is called Jacobean architecture. Look it up, familiarize yourself with it, family. It's all over Britain until today. So this is life before the storm for those who were obviously quite wealthy in Ireland. This is life before the soldiers came, before the confiscation orders, before the kidnapping, before the slave ships. Ireland was alive and our people were living large. Look at this beautiful Jacobean style estate that is in Ireland. Look how wonderful it is. We were farmers. We had an eye for gardening, landscaping. We established and laid the foundations that Britain enjoys today. When our earliest ancestors came, this land was very much just wooded forests. It was forest land. And it took us thousands of years, our people, thousands of years to cut their way through and to shape the landscape to what we have today. And we did this all over the world. Yeah, we started in Africa with the agricultural plantations, and we took that technology and those skills and that science of planting farms all over the world wherever we went. And it's still the technology and the scientific works that we're using today. And here we have another beautiful example of Jacobean property. This one here is in Mosdale and in Canterbury. Again, we had an eye for detail when it came to the gardens. Many of Britain's most beautiful estates and wonderful gardens actually belonged to those early Africans who were the population here in Britain prior to the transplantation to the Caribbean and to America. It's just that most of us don't know. And if you don't know, you don't know. So this is a kind of AI image of what one of our bustling towns may have looked like. You probably would have had one of these estates in the background, and in the foreground, you would have a bustling town that would have been built around or in the vicinity of one of the estates. And of course, wherever we are as a people, you have our markets, you have our close-knit communities, our people. We love style and fashion from back in the day. So, all those wonderful fabrics and silks that we're still making in Africa today found their way all the way to where we are in Britain today. And, our people, as we can see from the clothes that we still have today, that they use in their theatre today. Imagine a lot of the clothes that they robbed our ancestors of, those fine robes and gowns and dresses and things, is what they use in their dramas and theatre shows, and they dress up in the clothes of our ancestors. But anyway, in this image, you can see, how our beautiful women are likely to have dressed, even to go to the marketplace. You can see that in our town there would have been, the bakers, the cobblers, the carpenters stores. We would have had, all the stores, the blacksmiths, because what I found from the logbook, the ship logbook of the people who were transplanted from Ireland and from Scotland to the Caribbean and America, is a lot of these people were skilled people. They were skilled laborers. And some of these logs actually documented the skills that our ancestors had when they were transplanted from Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And so the skills that they had, they were utilizing at the time in their towns and cities. And so across the country, there would have stood these impressive manor houses, and they were family estates, and the extended family would have lived nearby in the vicinity. And, the towns would have developed based on extended family relationships, because back in the days in Britain, we had tribes as well. Every kind of town was basically a clan, an extended family that had, been developed over the thousands of years. And so there was a sense of belonging in these towns, a sense of belonging in the community, because these families had been there for generations. Their homes were the homes that their father or their forefathers had built. And, the towns, there would have been a lot of love that would have been put into the development of those lands, and the gardens and the orchards and the waterfalls and the waterways. It would have been a labor of love to develop these towns, these fields, and these cities that would have stretched across the landscape of Ireland, Scotland, right into Britain. And inside some of these grand houses, we know the kind of dresses and the gowns and the outfits that they were wearing back in that period, because, as I said, they still have a lot of these gowns that they bring out for their theatre shows and their productions, and we see them in the gowns. They put themselves in our outfits, and they take pictures of themselves in it, and they put themselves up in their portraits in our outfits and in our grand homes, the homes that used to be occupied by our families. And in these grand houses and these grand mansions and these grand chateaus that our people who had the wealth back in the days, they would have used those houses for celebrations, for family entertainment, for weddings, for hosting events, the sort of things that we as a people enjoy doing today. Wherever we are in the world, we enjoy celebrations. We enjoy bringing a family together. We enjoy, and we like to do it large, and we like to do it big, and our family and our people dress up same way. We like to dress up today and go to weddings and events, etc. We were doing that back in the days as well. So here's an example of, an event, a banquet event, where families would have entertained their guests, and they would have had a wonderful and enjoyable time. And, this is another scene that's a bit out of place now. That should have been before. Another example of our vibrant towns there. I did have another image of inside the house, which was a bit of a feast, but that one's out of place. But let's also mention that in Ireland and Scotland, and sadly, this was at the root of our problem, religion played a major role. The church stood as the heart of the community. I mean, the bells would ring to let people know, what time of day it was. Families would gather at the church for the weddings, for the baptisms, for the funerals, just as we do today. We respected holy days. The whole entire village, would come together in prayer, in celebration, in fellowship. And the priest, was not simply a religious leader. He was a trusted member of the community, an advisor, a teacher, a guardian, and, we had monasteries, we had churches, we provided charity for the poor, provided education for the young people. I mean, we ran our towns and our cities pretty much how they are being run today. How, because these have been taken over, and they have, as they've taken over, continued to run things the way we did back in the day. But sadly, the church actually was at the root of our problem, because Ireland was very Catholic, and it wanted to be part of the Roman Catholic Empire, the growing and expanding Roman Catholic Empire. And then, England, after Henry VIII, as we know, they became Protestant, and they wanted to, the Church of England to be separated from the Catholic, the growing Catholic influence. And, that was the crux of wars after wars after wars between our people, to the point where we just destroyed ourselves and allowed others to come in and take over. Wow. So that was just giving you a bit of a flavor, really, of what life must have been like prior to us self-destructing ourselves. And so, obviously life wouldn't have been perfect, but, we would have had our disputes, we would have had our hardships, we would have had our political tensions. And this would have been happening throughout Europe, and it was happening throughout Europe. There were always wars there was always infighting, family feuds, family fighting each other for positions, for power, and that would have caused some instability, but not to the point where we lost our dignity and we lost any hope of a future, which is what happened when, others came in and took control through the army and really started to oppress us as a people. And so here we have an example of another country home. This is Waterford in Ireland. It's a place called Lismore Castle. A lot of our ancient Jacobite and ancestral homes have now become hotels, Airbnbs, tourist spots. So they're still continuing to earn, from the wealth that our ancestors left behind, not just, on a national basis, but even the towns and the cities where our ancestors were, and with what's left behind of what they built, they continue to earn. And this should have been an inheritance to the children and the children's children and the future generations, to us. It should have been passed down to, but instead we've got those who don't look like us who have taken over control of all of this. So what I want to do now is just to jump back to, let me jump to the book now. And I hope you enjoyed that brief presentation. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to go into today's story. But actually, before I do, let me jump over to the chat and see who we've got in the house. Rise up, rise up. We've got Brother Errol in the house. Great to have you in the house. He's saying, another night of knowledge and education. I am tuned in to learn. Thank you so much, beloved. Great to have you in the house as well. We've got Brother Joseph's in the house, and this is mental. Yeah, it is so much to take in. Thank you, Kev, for having my book. She said, I've got your beautiful book. Thank you so much. And yeah, more love being sent towards our Dr. Clive Winters. Yahweh, Rapha, rise up, rise up. And yeah, send me your messages. Let me know where in the world that you are watching us from. And yeah, let us know if you've done any research for yourself and uncovered the truth. I mean, a lot of our people have been, and not just our people, even the Caucasians have been so indoctrinated with a false version of history that they find it really difficult to accept the truth. But when the evidence is staring you in the face, when their own archaeologists are telling them the truth, if they do the research, they will find out for themselves. So for those in the chat who don't believe it and are thinking and are saying, rubbish, lies, I don't believe it. Don't believe me. Do the research for yourself. Okay. All righty. So I'm going to go into the book that's entitled To Hell or Barbados, the Ethnic Cleansing of Ireland. And I read, the ethnic cleansing of Ireland may be said to have begun on the 24th of August, 1652. On that day, there was put into operation the most thorough and ruthless transfer of the Irish people to overseas colonies ever undertaken by any English leader. So who were these people that were transplanted overseas to the colonies? Were they white people or were they black people? Yeah, I want you to have that in the back of your mind. Who were the people that were being ethnically cleansed out of Ireland? This is what you're going to have to ask yourself. Did you know that there was a proclamation that was issued which gave ultimate power to the commissioners of Ireland to seize and transport anybody of whatever rank who was judged dangerous to the Commonwealth? Into this category fell landlords who refused to transplant, some of whom were not even Tories, soldiers who had not immigrated to join foreign armies, and the dependents of the soldiers who had gone abroad. As we have seen, the majority of the Irish swordsmen, as the English called them, who had gone abroad to join the armies of several foreign countries, not at war with England, were not allowed to take their dependents with them. Therefore, a vast number of women were left behind in a destitute situation. An order was passed by the council that Irish women, as being too numerous now and therefore exposed to prostitution, be sold to merchants and transported to Virginia, New England, or other countries where they may support themselves by their labor. This was most probably the most cynical piece of legislation passed by the Council of Ireland. While it was true that a few Irish women married or prostituted themselves with Cromwellian soldiers, the penalties for doing so were very severe for both parties. There was a quote at the beginning of the chapter, and it said, "Young maidens of noble families were despoiled of their possessions and dragged almost naked and piercing heaven with their shrieks to a ship bound for the West Indies." That was written by Cardinal Giovanni Battista Russanini, Papa Nuncio, to the Confederation of Kilkenny. He wrote that in 1645 to 1648. So heaven seems to have been deaf to the screams and the cries of the children of those noble families who were being robbed of their possessions and robbed of their clothes and dragged almost naked and put on those ships bound for the West Indies. So to those in the chat that were saying pure rubbish, who were the ones who were dragged onto the ships and sent to the West Indies? Was it white people or was it black people? Who were the ones who were branded? Who were the ones who were whipped? Who were the ones who were stripped? Who were the ones that were being thrown overboard on those ships? Was it white people or black people? Let's continue the reading to see what happened to these people of Ireland. And from the knowledge that we have of history and the evidence that we have of history of who those people were that were transplanted to places like Barbados, Jamaica, the Americas, and are still very much, the dominant population in those regions today, the descendants of these very same people. Let's continue. It was no difficult matter at this time to round up plenty of women and children, as there were crowds of young widows and deserted wives and sons and daughters wandering about in the neighborhood of cities and towns without any visible means of support. It is not surprising that they gravitated towards the towns and cities. The countryside was a wilderness. Very little was left growing after Cromwellian soldiers had devastated it with fire and with the skiffs that Cromwell had thoughtfully provided for just this purpose. Famine was endemic, and some writers have mentioned that cannibalism was rife. One such writer was George Bennett in his history of Randon. He stated, allegedly quoting from old documents, and it's interesting as well to hear the language in these old documents and the contempt that they had for the people who they were talking about and who they were writing about. So you'll get this very contemptuous and insulting language that's being used to describe the people of Ireland, to justify the heinous crimes that were being committed against them when they were sending them to the Caribbean and America. So I'm reading from page 78 of the book. If you've got the book, I'm reading from page 78 of the book. Okay, and so I'm reading what George Bennett wrote in his history of Brandon. And this is what he allegedly quoted from the old documents. And we have seen as well, family, that there have been some misquotes from old documents. In the last episode, there was a misquote. There was a description of an incident that an eyewitness described back in 1657. Richard Ignot described a scene that he saw about a whipping, someone who was being caned in Barbados. And the recent writer, misquoted that by inserting that the person who was being caned was white. But when you go to the original source, the person who was the eyewitness of the incident didn't say what the complexion of the person was who was being caned in Barbados. So we have to be mindful that some historians and some writers, when they quote from old documents, they're not quoting exactly what is being said in those old documents. So we need to read it for ourselves. And when there's the level of contempt towards us as a people being displayed by some of these authors, we need to be even more mindful that we need to investigate ourselves. Someone says, now you're going home back to Africa. Yes, Africa is indeed our home, and Africa is the home of humanity. The first people of the world, of course, all the humans come from Africa. But we didn't all stay in Africa. We populated the entire globe, and there's evidence of that in every country on every continent of this world. Go to my previous series if you haven't watched it. I actually present a lot of that evidence there that people are busily trying to destroy until today. So look at it while it's there, family. Brandon says that the few persons that were occasionally to be met with in the rural parts were wandering orphans whose fathers had embarked for Poland or Spain, and whose mothers had died of hunger, or were miserable old people who would quarrel over a putrid carcass raked from a stagnant pool, and some of whom were seen to eat human flesh cut from the corpses of a fellow creature that lay broiling on the fire before them. Wow. The work of rounding up people for transportation was carried out very thoroughly by government agents throughout the country. Okay, so I've noticed actually that that quote, it doesn't give a date for that quote, which is very, very important because, you know, there was the early population, the original Black population of Ireland, and after the Cromwellian transplantation, the population of Ireland changed. A lot of the English were the ones who were, and the soldiers in the English army were given the land. We've read about that in previous chapters. They were given the estates, they were given tens of acres of land, they were given, you know, huge estates and land that they would take over. And you'll notice in the 17th century as well that a lot of the earls and the lords who are the first start in the 17th century. So basically, the 17th century, the mid 17th century for the English was like the Great Reset. The Great Reset. They got rid of the original people of the land, and those that took over, maybe like they might have taken over the Lindsay Castle that had been, in the Lindsay family for generations. Okay, when they took it over in the mid 17th century, they would have called themselves Lord Lindsay the First. So there are many firsts in the 17th century, and that is a story in itself that needs further investigating. So yeah, they were rounding up people for transportation, and they did this very thoroughly. The government agents throughout the country were the ones who were rounding up the people, and these government agents were called man catchers, a bit like ICE today, are they not? These man catchers, as they were called, were mounted and armed with long whips to herd the unfortunate people into the holding pens outside the cities and towns, much as cattle were driven to the fairs in Ireland in the recent past. Here they were branded with the initials of the ship. Are we not familiar with that story, family, of our ancestors being branded with the names of the ship or the name of the overseer, not the overseer, the plantation owner? So here we have the Irish that had been rounded up and caught by these man catchers and put into, driven to the ports. They would be branded with the initials of the ship that would take them to Barbados or Virginia. They were attached together with ropes around their necks, and the long march to the seaports in the south of Ireland began. Their meager food was barely enough to sustain life, and those who fell by the wayside, weak from hunger or disease, were left where they fell. When they arrived, I mean, all the way through, I want everybody to ask themselves, who are they talking about? Who are they talking about who is being described here? Is it the Black Irish or the White Irish? Who were the ones that was branded with the initials of the ships? Who were the ones that were taken to Barbados and Virginia? Who were the ones who were attached together with ropes around their necks? And who were the ones that were being marched to the seaports? To get on those ships to go to Barbados, Virginia, or the other Caribbean islands. When they arrived at the seaports of Waterford, Cork, Dungarvan Passage, Youghal, Kinsale, and Bantry, they were flung into filthy jails to await the arrival of the slave ships from Bristol or London. So what we're finding out here, family, and this is the hidden part of our history. A lot of our people don't know still don't know and don't realize that a lot of people who ended up in Barbados, in Virginia, in Jamaica, in Montserrat, were actually shipped from the seaports of Waterford, Cork, Dungraven, Passage, Youghal, Kinsale, and Bantry in Ireland. Yeah. And we were being held in filthy jails there in the same way that some of our ancestors were being held in these awful gallows and holes, waiting to board the ships from West Africa as well. So we know very much about the stories of the Africans who were shipped from Africa to the West Indies. But what has been hidden from us that we are uncovering now is that a lot of our people were actually shipped from Ireland, England, Ireland, and Scotland as well. Don't believe me? Read the book for yourself. To Helen Barbados, and who is really being talked about in this book. So they were held in the jails to await the arrival of the slave ships from Bristol or London. Often a ship would be delayed, and the prisoners were then transferred to hulks to await boarding. So let's go over to the chat and see what's being said. Someone said the original Africans were white as snow. How's that? No, the Africans have never been deficient in melanin. The Africans have always had their melanin. Okay, so I'm going to put some of these nuisance people in timeout, I think. So yes, we're in chapter 6, and I'm on page 79 at the moment to those who are actually following. Okay, let's see what else you're saying. Right, we've got Amoro in the house. Okay, rise up, rise up. The first step of healing and reconciliation is to acknowledge, is acknowledging the horrors of the past instead of lies and manipulating realities. Absolutely, we have to acknowledge the horrors of the past. And I think as a people, we have been more than fed a fair share of the knowledge that that the conquerors have written about the horrors of our past. But prior to the horrors of our past, we also need to acknowledge our former greatness as well. Okay, and as I said, all of this work is backed up by evidence, so go and check it for yourself. Okay, don't believe me. Check it out for yourself. So this one says, the problem with those of you in the chat who dismiss verifiable arguments backed by evidence is that you are used to conditions that preserves ignorance and lawlessness guised in white supremacy. That is so, so true. But this is a new age. We're in the information age. And if people want to remain ignorant, then it's by choice, okay? You have no excuse. It's inexcusable for you to remain ignorant today because there is more than enough information out there now to be able to convince you that you as the majority population in Britain today have been sold a lie. And this is where we're going to be, family, even in South Africa in 100 years' time. They're going to be, the white South Africans are going to be convincing themselves and be trying to convince the world that they are the original people of South Africa. They're going to be trying to convince the world that they are the indigenous to the land. This is what they do wherever they go. You're only indigenous to the Caucasus Mountains. That's why you're called Caucasians, because you come from the Caucasus Mountains. And whenever you came among us as a people, we received you. We are we are so full of humanity, despite all of what we have been through and what you have done to us as a people. You know, the humanity in us stops that vengeance from rising up against you. And so, you know, I think you ought to be grateful that we do have that. Our melanin gives us such a high level of humanity, and yeah, you have been taught, white people, sorry, Caucasians, you have been given a history and sold a history that largely doesn't belong to you, that belongs to the indigenous people. And the evidence is there if you decide to go and research it for yourself, yeah, to convince you that Africans are the indigenous people of England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, and in fact, the whole of Europe. Yeah. In fact, we're indigenous to the whole world, and we have been here for hundreds of thousands of years. Your own archaeologists are having difficulty trying to find evidence of the presence of white people prior to 3,000 years ago. That's how recent white people are to the planet. Okay? All right. So this is reality. It's not me just saying it. It's what the research and the archaeologists are uncovering. And the geneticists who are studying the DNA of the ancient skeleton remains, go and check it out for yourself. They thought Cheddar Man was a white man until they did the DNA scraping and found that he was deeply and richly melanated. And they also did the scrapings of over 365 skeleton remains that they found around the Stonehenge area. And they found that almost all of them as well were Black people. What does that tell you? Okay, anyway, let me go back to the book and try not to be too distracted by our wonderful detractors in the audience. I see we've got Brother Kwame Ose in the house. Rise up, rise up. He says, sisters, there is no such thing as white people. They are kind of man from the original man. They are a kind of man. That's why they call them mankind. Because, yes, we know that you have Neanderthal DNA, which is why you're a kind of man. So you're kind of mixed with us, Neanderthal, with the human African DNA, whether that was done genetically or ancestrally, you know, intimately through the admixture of Black and Neanderthals, we don't know. But the scientists are still trying to work that one out, okay? As soon as they uncover the truth, I will bring that information to the audience. But at the moment, what the scientists are saying is that the Caucasians are descendants of Neanderthals, and it was as a result of the admixture between the African and the Neanderthals that we have over the centuries, the people who we now see today as a kind of man. Okay, and that what just touched me then is that, but what the admixture hasn't been able to do for all of the Caucasians is to give you all a soul, because it's in the soul that there is the humanity. The humanity is in the soul. And if, you know, today's Caucasians who live among us had a soul, they wouldn't do half the things that they do around the world today. There wouldn't be an obliterated Gaza today. There wouldn't be starvation and hunger and bombing happening in the Congo. There wouldn't be the devastation that we're seeing in so many parts of the world. You know, the restraint, what stops man from committing that level of destruction is humanity. And that humanity is in the soul. But if you are a soulless being, you will kill a majestic lion just to have it as a trophy. You will kill a majestic elephant just to feel, you know, that you are a conqueror. You will kill a beautiful giraffe. You will wipe out, you know, a species of birds that have been there from the beginning of time. Soulless beings, you know. But the good news is that that they are not as bad as they were in the days when they first came out the caves. So there is more humanity that's been embedded in these people over time. Anyway, stop distracting me with all the white people stuff. Let me get back to the book. And then as I read, you can decide for yourself whether the story that we're reading about here is about the blacks who were transported to Barbados, Jamaica, Montserrat, and America, who became enslaved people, or are we talking about white people being transported on the slave ships, being branded with the initials of the ship, being whipped, and being sent to Barbados, Montserrat? Okay, back to the book. When they arrived at the seaports, oh yes, I did that bit, the seaports of Waterford, Cork, Dungraven, Passage, Youghal, Kinsale, and Bantry, they were flung into filthy jails to wait the arrival of the slave ships from Bristol or London. Often a ship would be delayed, and the prisoners were then transferred to the hulks to await boarding. There was a special demand for young women, marriageable and not past breeding, who were eagerly sought after by the sugar planters, who, to quote Henry Cromwell, and to be honest, I've got to research this quote, it says, had only negresses and maroon women to solace them. So the maroons, called by the Spanish the Cameroonians, or wild men, were descendants of slaves who had fled into the mountains. The man catchers were paid £4 or £4.10 by the ship's captains for every young woman or child. There is a reference to the number of children involved in a note in the Public Records Office held in Kew Gardens. Sir John Clotsworthy was given a license by the Board of Trade to transfer 1,000 children to Virginia. Now, this is really interesting because we know that this book is actually saying here that the Maroons, who were called by the Spanish the Cameroons or Cimarroons, were wild men and were descendants of slaves. No, they were probably the original people of the island. Yeah, because there were Africans everywhere, as I said, and there's evidence to back it up. This is a history that the modern writers have tried to impose on us. They've tried to impose a history that suggests that if you see an original black person anywhere in the world, they were the descendants of slaves. No, they're the descendants of the original people of the land who didn't want to be enslaved. The man catchers were paid £4 or £4.10 by the ship's captains for every young woman or child. There is a reference to the number of children involved in a note in the Public Records Office held in Kew Gardens by John Clotsworthy, and he was given a license by the Board of Trade to transfer 1,000 children to Virginia. Now, I've actually seen the records of a shipload of people. There was 150 people that were on this particular ship, and the records remain today because that ship went missing, and the captain of the ship and the owners of the ship wanted to find the people who were on board the ship. And so there was a list of names of all the people who were on that ship, and I might be able to show it to you. Oh no, it's on my other computer, but I will put it in a book at some point. It's a list of 150 names of people who are being transported, in this instance from Scotland, and it also included the complexion of those people, and over 80% of them were described as either black, brown, or swarty. There were only a few who were described as pale skin and only 1 or 2 who were described as white. And so, yes, there may well have been, or there certainly was, according to that list, a small number of pale people who were described as having pale skin, and someone who was described as having been white, who was transported on that ship that listed the 150 names. And so that is a clear example of the racial profile of those who were going on the ships. And anything that suggests otherwise, I would have to examine it. Yes, you're right, Brother Kwame. Brother Kwame says that white, just as black, is a gross misnomer. These idioms were and are used to justify white terrorism. Yes, you're absolutely right, and I do stand corrected on that, Brother Kwame. It is a fact that the whole concept of whiteness was actually developed in the 17th century. And the concept of whiteness, for it to exist, has to be able to point to what it calls blackness. And so for this concept of whiteness to stand, they have to create this kind of ideology of whiteness being supreme, whiteness being everything right, whiteness being great, whiteness being da-da-da-da-da-da. And then they have to be able to reinforce that through the history, even if the history is a lie. They have to be able to reinforce that ideology through the films, through the dramas, through the books, in order for it to stand. And conversely, equally, in order for it to stand, that blackness is negative, that blackness, never achieved anything, never conquered anything, never, understood the sciences or engineering or anything else. In order for the idea of black being negative to stand, they have to be able to build a whole concept around that, and to be able to substantiate it as well. And they substantiate it through their draconian laws, through discrimination, through racism, through differential treatment, through abusive police tactics, judiciary systems, by locking up, us disproportionately in their prisons. I mean, these are the ways that they are able to substantiate the whole misnomer of there being white and black. It's a very clever concept, and you're right, we ought to throw that away, really. We really ought to throw that away. Yes, it was the social scientists that came up with the blueprint for that particular concept, and you've named the person as well that created the cult, and it's a false cult through propaganda. Thank you for that information. I'll have to read up more on that as well. And yes, I can see how it's going to be linked to the Jim Crow and apartheid laws that were created to really be able to differentiate between those Caucasians and the Africans, so that we don't come together to overthrow the system, and so that that small minority group can see themselves as something superior and justify the really awful treatment that we as a people tend to suffer. So thank you for that, beloved. It's so true. It is a false nomer, and it is an ideological concept that we've all bought into. Right, let's go back to the book. The historian Dr. Thomas Addis Emma, in his book Ireland Under English Rule, or A Plea for the Plaintiff, published in New York in 1903, stated over 100,000 young children who were orphaned or had been taken from their Catholic parents were sent abroad into slavery in the West Indies, Virginia, and New England, that they might thus lose their faith and all knowledge of their nationality. It was a deliberate strategy that we would lose knowledge of our nationality. And they gave us a different nationality. They told us that we all came directly from Africa. And yes, of course, we are of African origin. That's why it was easy for us to believe that we came straight from Africa. But they didn't tell us that prior to us coming from Africa, we'd actually spent about 40,000 years in Britain, and that we were being directly transported from Britain, a lot of us, to those Caribbean islands. Here it is. Yeah. And it says, oh, now if these were, I'm thinking, this is what I'm thinking. If it was over 100,000 white people who are being transplanted to the West Indies, like Barbados and Virginia, wouldn't the complexion of the Barbadians look very different today? Where are those descendants of those whites, the hundreds of thousands? They would have multiplied by now in the way that Africans have multiplied, would they have not? You would have large communities like you do in South Africa. Yes, we can see, that if there was a body of whites that had been transported to Barbados, we would see that in the way that we're seeing this body of white trying to take over the southern region of Africa. But that's not what we're seeing, is it? Anyway, over 100,000 young children who were orphans were taken from their Catholic parents and were sent abroad into slavery in the West Indies, Virginia and New England, that they might lose their faith. Because remember, they didn't want our people to be Catholics. They wanted us, to be part of the Church of England and Protestants, good Protestants, like we all are today. So we had to lose the knowledge of our Catholic faith, and we had to lose knowledge of our true identity as well. For in most instances, even their names, it said, were changed. This seems to be an exaggerated estimate, claims this writer, but the trade in children and young women flourished. It certainly did. Now, yes, I do know that some names were changed, but I also know that many of us went to the Caribbean and America with our names. And there are books that have been written that have looked into the names of these, minority so-called slave masters or plantation owners. And, there are not enough names for all of the names that we have as Africans. And it makes better sense that we actually went there with our names. And there has been some separate research that's gone into that as well, so you can check that out for yourself. So we have the names of some of these slave ships, primarily from Bristol, it says, but some from London. Did you hear that? Slave ships primarily from Bristol and some from London, which called at Irish ports. The Jane, the Susan and Mary, the Elizabeth and the two brothers. These are the names of ships that were used to transport black slaves. It says, and this is what some would say is the, what would you call it? The sleight of hand, when you drop in something like this, transport black slaves from the west coast of Africa to the West Indies. Okay, so this is like how they try to cover it up. They're covering up the fact that these ships were shipping also black people from Ireland by saying, and these are the same ones that were shipping black slaves from Africa. Yeah. The merchants simply switched to the Irish slave trade at a considerable profit to themselves, he says, following a long line of slave merchants who made fortunes from buying slaves in the African market and selling them in Barbados and the colonies of the America. Yes, indeed. Some of our brothers were shipped directly from West Africa. We are very familiar with that history, but what we're also looking into now is the realization that many of us were also shipped from right here in England. Wow. So, yeah, they made a fortune selling African slaves in Barbados and the colonies of America. So lucrative was this traffic that it was known as black gold. The Portuguese and Spanish found in African slaves a most profitable business, quickly followed by the Dutch. The English were comparative latecomers to the trade. Of course, they were latecomers to the trade of African slaves because they were too busy emptying England, Ireland, and Scotland and Wales of the blacks that they had here. Yeah. And with ICE, if that went into full swing and operation in America, they would be busy emptying America of the blacks that they've got there as well. And everything that the American blacks have contributed would be taken over by today's white Americans. Oh, just like they're trying to say they're the ones who founded rock and roll and blues and jazz and everything else. Everything we do, them say them are the originators for it, you know. And so it's great also that we're actually finding out who the inventors were. So many of the things that we use today, and that's not surprising because we are the ancient of ancients, and obviously were the ones who invented civilization itself. Right, let me see how much more of this is to read because I better hurry up and run through because time is running and passing. Let me run through and skip through some of it. So there were petitions that were received from a Bristol merchant. He was a Bristol slave merchant and he wanted to be allowed to participate in the so-called trade. The Cromwell Parliament was being petitioned. They wanted a license to transport 400 Irish Tories and others who they were calling idle vagrants. They wanted to transplant them to the Caribbean islands. And so basically they all wanted to get in on transplanting these Black Irish to the Caribbean. The commissioners of England were only too willing to oblige Cromwell by getting rid of a surplus and potentially dangerous population. In January 1654, they ordered the governors of Carlow, Kilkenny, Clonmel, Ross, Wexford, and Waterford to arrest and deliver to Captain Thomas Morgan Dudley, North, and John Johnson, English merchants, all wanderers, men and women, and other Irish within their precincts, as should not prove that they had such a settled course of industry as yielded them a means of their own to maintain them. All such children as were in hospitals or workhouses, all prisoners, men and women, to be transported to the West Indies. The governors were to transfer the people who were rounded up to the ports of shipping, but these were to be provided for and maintained by the contractors. There we go. So this is what we're talking about. The mass rounding up of men, women, children. They were taking children out of the hospitals or the workhouses. They were taking people out of the prisons. They were transporting them all to the West Indies, not from Africa, from Ireland, and transferring these people via the shipping ports. So William Petty, who had carried out the down survey of Ireland, described the Irish slave trade in his book, The Political Anatomy of Ireland, 1672. Thus, the widows and orphans, the deserted wives and families of the swordsmen were kidnapped and transported by the slave trading merchants to Bristol, which their previous experience enabled them to organize with advantage to themselves. And, you know, in previous chapters, we were reading that as many as over 30,000 men were sent off to war, and leaving behind their wives and their families. So you multiply up. If each of these men had 3, 4, 5 family members, and there were 30,000 of them, you know, we're talking about 5 times 30,000, 150,000 people or so right there and then. My maths is right. You can do the maths for me and let me know in the chat. You know, but yeah, if there were 5 members, 30,000 soldiers went abroad to fight in the wars. And this was a deliberate strategy to kill off the men. They wanted the men to die, so they put them at the front of everybody's wars. The children and the wives were left behind, and they were then kidnapped and transported as part of the slave trading merchants to Bristol and sent to Barbados and other Caribbean islands. In September, a Captain John Vernon was employed by the commissioners for Ireland and signed a contract on their behalf to supply Mr. Sillip and Mr. Yeomans, Bristol's merchants, with 250 women above the age of 12 years to be found in the country within a 20 miles radius of Cork, Youghal, Kinsale, Waterford and Wexford, and then transport them to Barbados and New England. Lord Broghill, governor of Cork, assured the commissioner that he could find in a short time the 250 within the environments of Cork alone. Wow. Elliot MacDonald, in his book, The Irish Abroad, 1915, gives an account of the fate of the young girls seized for transshipment abroad. While in a majority of cases, those destined for the plantations were put on board ships in Irish ports, O'Donnell gives an example of Irish girls shipped from Cork to Bristol and there put on board a slave ship. He says it is a harrowing account. Okay, so, we're talking about the slave trade here, which most of us know, who the victims were of the slave trade. We're not saying there weren't maybe some white people who might have been picked up along the way as well. There certainly probably was, because on that shipping log, there were a few people who were described, well, just a couple of people who were described as white and pale in complexion, but the vast majority were being described as black, as swarty, and as brown in complexion. But anyway, let's hear this harrowing account. Between the years of 1651 and 1654, over 40,000 Celtic Irishmen marched away to die with all their accustomed gallantry, many winning unperishable renown in the services of France, Spain, Poland, and Italy. So here we have 40,000, sorry, not 34,000, 40,000 who were marched off. Having thus succeeded in deporting the men, Cromwell next turned his attention to the women. Hearing that the planters in New England and West Indies were weary of maroons and would pay for any price for a white woman, Puritan Cromwell at once volunteered to supply their needs. Gangs of his soldiers invaded Connaught, pouncing on all the women and girls they could find. So here, yes, they rounded up some women, some white women and some white girls as well, and they were to satisfy the needs of planters and to become the wives of planters. But, unlike Africa, most of these white planters, they didn't have many white wives. They tended just to have one white wife. So, the numbers are quite limited there. So anyway, these girls and the gangs would round them up. And in 1603, it was 1603 over again, only on a much larger and even more revolting scale. The young and pretty women were frequently violated. The older and uglier, they were beaten and branded. From Cork, they were taken to Bristol and branded. They were taken to Bristol, and after being publicly sold in the market, they were thrust on board ships and borne to their final destination. Wow. The mild shrieks from imagining the horrors, the mind shrinks from imagining the horrors of the suffering at sea from the records of survivors. They must have been at least equal to any of the sufferings experienced by African slaves on the way to America. Of course it would have been, and it was. And those who do admit that there was some whites who were enslaved, what they try to suggest is that their treatment was very different. And, obviously, if they became the wives of these planters, their treatment would have been very different. But those who didn't may well have found themselves, suffering some of the experiences that the vast majority of us as Africans suffered on those plantations. Right, so they suffered at sea, and from the records of survivors, yep, they must have been equal to any of the suffering experienced by the Africans. But as certainly did not happen in the case of the latter, their hardships excited no sympathy in England. The inhabitants of Bristol watched them being packed on board and driven below with the same dull curiosity and phlegm which they displayed in watching the embarkment of cattle. So, the Irish had been demonized to such a great extent, or there was such a difference between the English of the day and the Irish of the day, that when they saw all these Irish people being marched onto the ships, they, despite the screams and the shrieks and the inhumanity of it all, they didn't care. They didn't care. They didn't care. It's like the lack of care that we see in some parts of the world today, when people are starving, when children are dying, when houses are being bombed, when weather machines are being used to create earthquakes and tsunamis and the like. The lack of care among some groups of people. This is what we had here. The lack of care, lack of interest. Right, let's jump forward because of time. Let's get another quote. This quote says, "Nothing is more painful than to witness the shipment of those exiles, the father separated from the child, brother from brother, sister from sister, relative from relative, friend from friend." Wow, we're familiar with that. That's why, we're probably related. Yeah, I've probably got relatives, that I don't know of in America or in Barbados, because, our foreparents were separated, weren't they? As part of this really awful, wretched enslavement. And this is what they'd done to the Irish. It's saying Cardinal Renunzi had returned to Rome before the debacle in Ireland. Nevertheless, he kept a correspondence with some of the clergy. He kept up a correspondence with some of the clergy in disguise, who watched the wretched Irish slaves being forced aboard the slave ships. Why are they calling them wretched? Why would you call a group of people wretches and wretched? Why? Anyway, the people who he was in correspondence with was telling him that, nothing is more painful than to witness, the shipment of those who were being sent into exile. Fathers were being separated from their children, brother from brother, sister from sister, relative from relative, friend from friend, spouse from spouse. At one place, we see the sons of noble families, the hope and consolation of their aged parents, youths delicately reared and carefully educated, who are not only robbed of every chance of their hereditary property, but are even despoiled of their more valuable clothes, receiving instead tattered rags, and are flogged with rods and branded like sheep on their skin and flesh, and then driven among a crowd on board these infamous transportation ships. Who are we talking about, family? Are we talking about Caucasians here, or are we talking about Africans, Black people? Yeah, and these are the Cardinal Renunzi's friends, his clergy, who disguised themselves and were watching. And so here we have an eyewitness account of what was happening. And they were saying it was so painful to watch. They recognized some of these children as the children of nobles, the children of those whose castles we were looking at earlier in the show today, the children of those who had been reared so delicately, given a good education, who wore grand clothes like the ones we're looking at in the image here. And they were stripped of their clothes. As I said, a lot of those clothes are in, the theatre warehouses today that they use and they dress up in and pretend that, they were us. Just like in 100 years' time, they'll pretend that they were James Brown and Michael Jackson. Make me laugh. Anyway, back to the book. We cannot, he said, we cannot today, this is the author of the book now saying, we cannot today imagine the terror which must have been felt by the Irish at their first sight of those slave ships. For most of the first half of the 17th century, the English slave trade was in the hands of privileged companies, the Company of Royal Adventurers, headed by the Duke of York, and including a number of prominent courtiers, was founded in 1660. So, as we know, it was the very wealthy that took part in the trade, and there were some very wealthy companies like the Company of the Adventurers of London that were getting contracts to get involved in this so-called trade. And the so-called slave ships, they were designed by builders for the African trade as well, and they had specifically designed the holes down the bottom. They put shelves that were fitted below the deck, which doubled the number of people that a ship could actually carry. The shelves allowed the slaves only 2 feet headroom, which meant that they could never sit up. As a certain Captain Newton, who was himself engaged in the African slave trade, put it, they were tightly packed in 2 rows, one above the other, on each side of the ship, close to each other like books upon a shelf. I have known them so close that the shelf would not easily contain one more. And I have known a man sent down among them to lay them in these rows to the greatest advantage, so that as little space as possible be lost. He adds that every morning, perhaps more instances than one are found of the living and the dead fastened together. The slaves were manacled 2 by 2 with iron shackles welded around the ankles. It meant if one slave needed to use the stinking buckets, which were the only means of relieving the wants of nature, he had to drag his fellow slave with him. On the African slave ships, captains were known as loose packers or tight packers. The tight packers held that the more they crammed into their ships, the more profit they made, even though the death rate would be higher. The loose packers, on the other hand, claimed that allowing the slaves a bit more room meant a lower death rate, and therefore it was more profitable to transport their slaves in that way. Captains received a bonus for every piece of merchandise that they landed safely in Barbados. It had nothing to do with being more humane. In the middle of the 17th century, it was usual to carry at least 2 slaves for each ton of the ship's weight. But very often, a ship weighing 100 tons carried 250 enslaved Africans. Some of the captains of these ships were brutes, having clawed their way up from able seamen to mates and then captains. It made no difference to them that their cargo was Irish and African slaves. They regarded them as goods for which they could obtain a good price on the Bridgetown markets. The men were even worse than their masters. Seamen who had jumped ship, deserters from the Royal Navy, men who had shanghaied from the grog shops of Bristol, Liverpool, and London, criminals who had escaped from jail. In short, the scum of the earth were part of this trade. We shall never know the exact number of Irish men, women, and children transported to the living hell of the West Indies and the Americas. The numbers vary from as low as 12,000 by R.F. Foster to modern Ireland, 1988, to 50,000 a year, which was the figure given by Cardinal Renunzi, who described the desperate plight of the Irish put aboard the slave ships. So who would you believe, family? Would you believe R.F. Foster and his numbers in the book that he wrote of modern Ireland in 1988? Or would you believe Runun Sinini, who described the plight that he witnessed back in, what was the date it is? But anyway, we know that he was an eyewitness to what was going on. I'd be inclined to believe the eyewitness. The Reverend Father Thomas Gwynn, S.J., who somehow managed to avoid capture and transportation, wrote a report in Latin to Rome entitled The State and Condition of Irish Catholics from the year 1652 to 1656. It stated, in part, and so these heretics, the English, caused the poor Catholics to be sent in crowded ships to Barbados and the island of America, such that those that did not die in the open remained in perpetual servitude. I believe that some 60,000 were sent there, and husbands expelled first to Spain and the Netherlands, whilst the wives and offsprings were destined for America, such that there was a perpetual divorce. Thus, what God and nature had joined together, the barbarous tyranny of the heretics had separated. According to Reverend T.N. Burt, in his series of lectures and sermons published in the New York's Irish American in the last century, some 80 to 100,000 men of Ireland were driven south to the ports of Munster, where they were shipped to the sugar plantations of Barbados. So it's really interesting because, you know, on the one hand, we have modern, we have the people of Ireland today who want to claim the history of Ireland as their own. Yeah, we know we're the original people of Ireland. We know the history. We know how long we were there for before we were transplanted and cleansed of the island. But anyway, so you have the people of today who want to claim the history of Ireland, but they don't want to claim this part of it, which is the part that talks about the ethnic cleansing of the Irish, yeah, and the branding of the Irish, and them being put on slave ships, and them being whipped, and them ending up on the plantations being whipped. They don't want to acknowledge and claim that part of the history. So what do? They bury it. If it was their history, it's their history, isn't it? Why claim some of it and not all of it? Why only claim the castles and the grand houses and the wonderful estates and the landscape gardens and claim the names and the titles and the lifestyle? Why just claim all of that, but not want to claim, you know, what's being witnessed here? The 80 to 100,000 men of Ireland who were driven south to the ports of Munster, where they were shipped to the sugar plantations of Barbados. What? Was it only black people who were slaves then? And if it was only black people who were slaves, we're talking about black people. If white people were slaves as well, why are you not admitting that some white people were enslaved? Yeah. Tell me that, family. Rise up, Brother Errol in the house. He's saying, if you did not know, now you know. Black history retold. Yes, indeed. If you didn't know, now you know, family. This is a book, a well-researched book, but as I was saying, some people seem to want to pick and choose what part of the history they claim. Happy to claim this part of the history, but then they want to give us the slave ship part of the history and not the history prior to our enslavement. Right, so yeah, 80 to 100,000 men were driven south and ended up on the plantations of Barbados. And I'm saying if there were 100,000 white people in Barbados a couple of hundred years ago, there should be about 1 million white people there today, should there not? Or at least 500,000 who are the descendants of these people. But we've got the descendants of those people who look like me who are still there. Reverend Aubrey Gwynn, a historian who in the 1930s carried out considerable research of the period and who published his findings in the paper, Cromwell's Policy of Transportation, thought this figure was an exaggeration. So it's interesting that, how the people of today, so to speak, are saying, no, these figures were exaggerated. Yeah, there wasn't that many. He's saying, there's probably about 50,000 in all over the 5-year period. They don't want to admit that there was a total cleansing and that hundreds of thousands of Irish were actually shipped to these Caribbean islands, because if they were to admit it, then you'd have to answer the question, where are they today? Where are the descendants? What came of them? These people didn't come back. So he says that, I'm inclined to suggest that there were a lot less. Firstly, the relatives. Who's this one speaking? I'm inclined, this is the author saying, I'm inclined to agree with Father Gwyn for several reasons. Firstly, the relatives of the 34,000 or 40,000, as some historians would have it, soldiers who were allowed to go abroad to join foreign armies, they were transported. And then, of course, their widows and orphans of those soldiers who were killed were transplanted as well between 1641 and 1652. Thirdly, there were all the vagrants and the vagabonds and the wanderers with no fixed abode who were also transported. So clearly, when you add them all up, he's saying, of course, 50 to 60,000 was a drop in the ocean compared to the 11 million or so of Africans. See, this is the sleight of hand again, but there were a lot more people from Ireland. If you count the relatives of those 34,000, they would have had, 4 or 5 members in their family household that they left behind. So you've got, over 150,000 there. 40,000, 800,000, 400,000. So you've got 500,000 there, just from the relatives of those 40,000 or so that were sent abroad. Plus, you have all of the vagabonds, you have all of the widows, you have all of the orphans, you have the people who were in the prisons. I mean, we're talking about millions, at least over 1 million that were transported from Ireland alone, much less, the cleansing that happened of Scotland a century later. Wow. Well, we're almost there. Let me quickly read through a little bit more to get to the end of this chapter. Not all of those put aboard the slave ship arrived at their destination. For the slavers, a loss of 20% was acceptable, meaning that at least 10,000 died at sea of malnutrition, the rigors of the voyage, or of the various diseases. As Colonel A.B. Ellis's article in the Argosy magazine in 1883 put it, it appears from the best information which is at present accessible that more than 1/5 of those who were shipped were flung to the sharks before the end of the voyage. For the Bristol merchants, the Irish slave trade was a better investment. The Irish white slaves cost about $4.10 a head, and they could be sold in Barbados for any sum between £10 and £35, allowing for the death rate. The slaves on a 250-ton ship, tightly packed, could fetch a profit of almost £5,000. I mean, today, that adds up probably to millions. This was much more lucrative than the triangular voyage. England, West Africa, Barbados. That was the triangular voyage. England, West Africa, Barbados. So they say, and that's the only voyage they tell us about. They didn't tell us about all those voyages that were going directly from England, full of people from Britain, to Barbados. Why hide it if there was nothing to hide? So this passage often took up a 12-month as compared to the 9 to 12 weeks that the voyage from Ireland to Barbados took. Although the African slaves cost only the equivalent £3 worth of goods a head, the length of the voyage, the death rate among the crew, and the long wait in African ports to make up the cargo of black slaves cuts into the profits. These slave ships carried a larger, so remember, this is what the author is saying here. So he's making this assumption now. So he's now trying to justify or trying to make a case for a difference between the enslavement of those who were taken from Africa, the shores of Africa, compared to those who were taken from the shores of Ireland. Okay, so this is all about, you know, trying to create this myth about there being a difference between those of us who were enslaved, who were the original people of England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, compared to those of us who were enslaved, who came directly from Africa. We all ended up on those plantations together. These slave ships carried a larger and better paid crew than did the ordinary cargo ships. So again, continuing to try and make a differentiation. Let me quickly run down the page because of time. As there is no record of how the Irish on the slave ships were treated, none ever returned, it says, we have to assume that they were treated exactly as the African slaves were treated, for which there are many records. The ships usually put in at Vera Cruz to take on fresh supplies, and during this time, the slaves were again confined to the holds with the hatches secured to prevent any attempt of escape or mutiny. It often took 2 or 3 days to take on supplies and to repair any damage caused by storms, while below the decks, the slaves were fed by buckets of food being lowered down to them. Who are we talking about? Caucasians? Or are we talking about Africans below those decks? When the ships left Veracruz for the long haul to Barbados, the slaves were allowed up on deck more often. The crews of the ships did not have to contend with one problem which they had with the Negro slaves. The Irish did not attempt suicide by jumping overboard or starving themselves to death simply because their religion forbade it. Mutiny was a different factor. Each time the slaves were allowed up on deck, the carronades were trained inboard and the gunners stood by with lighted matches. We have no direct evidence that mutinies occurred, but considering the various uprisings and rebellions in which the Irish undoubtedly took part during their slave years on the island, it is inconceivable that no show of resistance took place on board those ships. That's the end of chapter 6, family. And who are the people who were enslaved that we're talking about? Who do you think they are? Who were these Irish? Were these Irish, Black Africans, the descendants of the original people, the indigenous people of Ireland? Or were they, the Caucasians, the pale people who are living there today? I'd be really interested to know your thoughts on who they were. So I'll do 1 or 2 more chapters from this book. I'll probably do the one on those that were sent to Jamaica, and then I'll probably do one on the rebellions that happened as well. The Irish that were involved in leading the rebellions on those plantations. So, family, I certainly hope that you learned something from today's presentation. Brother Errol is saying, if you did not know, now you know. Black history retold. I love that. We've got a beautiful sister who does all these TikTok or Instagram posts. And I love at the end where she says, if you didn't know, now you know. She's great. So thank you for that, Errol. And I've got a post here. Yes, put your comments up. So Barbados was called Little England. Now we know why. Yes. And there's also a town in Barbados, I think, that's called Little Scotland as well, or Little Scott. So you might know that. And we've got places in Jamaica that's known to have names from Ireland as well. Our ancestors were trying to tell us where they came from. And in fact, oral tradition in Jamaica actually has it that a lot of our people came to Jamaica from Ireland and Scotland. And we used to dismiss this because, we were taught that we all arrived in Jamaica directly from Africa. So we would dismiss that as like old wives' tales, or as Jamaicans not wanting to admit that they were African. And now we're uncovering the truth of our history, that yes, indeed, many of us did come directly from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, which is why we called England the motherland, which is why so many of our people, when they were called in the 50s and 60s to come to the motherland to help repair the motherland, we didn't realize why their spirit so readily took them back here. It's because they were coming back home. And yes, Brother Kwame, we are Africans wherever we are. Rise up, Brother Kwame Oboji, joining me so late. Certainly hope that you look back on today's show. Thank you for joining us, albeit late. But please do watch it in your own time. I hope you find it interesting. I want to thank everybody who's joined us on the show today. It's been another incredibly insightful show. I've found it so. I certainly hope that you found it so. While I've been doing the research, wow, every day I'm just uncovering more and more of our research. So I'd like to encourage you, family, to do the research as well. I've got so much more that I want to bring to you that I have been uncovering and that I've been finding out. And, with every episode, when we do the research and we uncover the history, basically we're honoring the victims of that era. We're remembering our ancestors, and I'm encouraging and inviting you as well, family, to reconnect with our history. And so please do check out the previous episodes if you haven't already watched them. And let me know your thoughts and opinions in the chat. And I know it's really difficult for those who have been indoctrinated with a whitewashed version of history to really believe what I'm saying. But what I say is, don't believe me, do the maths and do the research for yourself. Sister Shanice out of here, ending the stream now. Thank you so much. Rise up, Brother Kwame. Thanks for your comments throughout the chat as well. And don't believe me, do the research yourself. Okay, and get my book that has a lot of evidence about who the original people of England, Ireland, and Scotland were. The book is called Hidden in the Shadows of Ancient Britain, an Erased African History Restored. That's Hidden in the Shadows of Ancient Britain, an Erased African History Restored. And if you're not already a Patreon or a supporter of this channel, please do subscribe, like, and share the channel. Sister Shanice out of here for now, and all be well. I'll be back here next strong. Bye for now.